Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the Wellness Podcast. I am Keoni Tita, and my co-host is Brian Brosey, and we are very excited today to have a guest. Our guest is Pasquale Caccavella. Am I pronouncing that right,
That's
Pascal?
right. Pasquale Caccavella.
Pasquale Caccavella, yes.
Mhm.
Anyway, thank you for coming on. And I had a conversation with Pasquale as far as sustainability. You actually came to my house and looked at some soil around my house and gave us some incredible information. So I was just like, I have to get you on to talk about all the stuff that we talked about while we were sitting around my dining room table and discussing what you found. So
This will be good because Keoni's got a safari as a yard. He's got random cats, dogs, birds,
right.
bees, everything.
Yeah, no. I mean, and well, it just led into so many things. So I see this episode as kind of maybe leading into other episodes with you, Pasquale. So thank you for being on.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things that also really excited me, like when we were discussing our stuff, I was currently reading a book called Braiding Sweetgrass. And it's by a scientist. Her name's Robin Kimmerer. And anyway, she has her background culturally is Native American, but she's also a plant biologist, I think, or ethnobiologist. Anyway, just reading that book like really kind of potentiated a lot my mind running with things that me and you talked about, because she really talked about kind of that worldview of sustainability and how the Native American or more traditional cultures would look at the world as, in a holistic way. And the other reason why I'm really excited about having you on is because I see this topic that we're going to talk about. We're going to get into soil health, but I also see this as completely analogous to kind of what Brian and I do, especially me at my clinic, where soil is analogous to the gut in medicine, and if the gut is not healthy, then the whole system is not healthy. So anyway, so just a little bit about you. Tell me if I'm saying anything wrong here, Pasquale. You're a packaging engineer. You got your degree in Clemson University in 2020, and outside of this career, you consider yourself an amateur mycologist, gardener, and citizen soil scientist. And I love that because I think we all should be citizen soil scientists, especially after I talked to you. While studying and practicing sustainable agriculture and permaculture principles, Pasquale has constantly confronted with the harsh reality of a global soil health crisis. That's something I really want to talk about with you, and why that is happening. This inspired him to become a soil food web microscopist. Am I saying that? Microscopist?
Yeah, with soil food. Using microscopy to analyze the soil food web. That's correct.
Right.
Yeah.
And this was with Dr. Elaine Ingham.
Dr. Elaine Ingham. She's created an online school called the Soil Food Web School, and it just teaches your average people how to get involved and get hands-on with soil health anywhere they are.
Okay. And it's kind of this, it's called Salem Soil Solutions, and it's kind of this organization that helps gardeners, landscapers, farmers.
Right. So the Soil Food Web School certifies people in soil assessments and microscopy, and even greater than that, full land management consulting, which I haven't completely gotten through yet. I've just gotten certified in microscopy. And so with that, you can go and start your own small business and put an LLC on things and start actually collecting soil samples from people and charging money and making an income just looking at soil samples. So I created what is named Salem Soil Solutions for Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And so since I'm certified now in microscopy, I'm going to be taking soil samples just from the public. Anyone that's interested can get a soil food web microscopy analysis, which is pretty specific. People are typically used to your standard gamut of soil testing, which has a lot to do with the hard elements, and a few other really common soil tests that don't look at living biology. The only way you can look at living biology is through the microscope.
Right. And this is what you did for me, right? When you came to my
Yes,
place
that's right.
to look at the health of our soil.
Mhm.
And this is important. And I just want you to go into details because you talked to me about this. What's going on with the soil in our planet? Like I mean, are we, where are we headed with what we're doing to the soil? Let's
Oh
start
man.
there.
Okay, where are we headed? Yeah, there's something called the Green Revolution in the 1960s, and that's when we really started using a lot of pesticides and fertilizers in huge monocrop agricultural industrial practices to feed our exponentially growing population at the time. And we've been tilling our soil even since the dawn of man. There's hieroglyphs with oxen bound by a yoke tilling the land. And so, and since then too, small localities, farmers with traditional agricultural practices, tribes all over the world have been practicing and continuing to evolve these sustainable, what are now called more permacultural agricultural practices, and those don't disturb the soil. So there's really two lanes of agriculture right now. One is I'm going to disturb the soil, and one is I'm not going to disturb the soil. And so since the general industrial model is based on soil disturbance in order to suppress weeds, the entire globe is sort of based on that system. So I mean, everyone's seen the combine in the agricultural field, or I mean, that might be common knowledge down here in the Southeast, maybe not other places, but
Right.
And so what happens is you take a giant, and analogous to the human body as well, maybe if you could imagine doing it to yourself and thinking, is this a good idea? So like in order to till the land, you pretty much take giant blades or discs or scythes, and you're going up under the surface level of the soil. You're turning everything up and over throughout the entire stretch of the field in order to break that now compacted dirt up, so you have access to plant seeds, things like that. Farmers talk about aerating their soils with tilling, and then it also breaks up all the weeds and suppresses the weed populations. But when you do that under the instrument that you're penetrating the soil with, you're pressing down quite firmly, and so you end up with a compaction layer. And so on all agricultural operations that till under, a few inches under where that instrument reaches and breaches the soil to till, you have this compaction layer depending on the size of the equipment you're using. Maybe it's only 6 inches deep. Maybe you've been tilling there for 100 years using industrial machinery, and it's 10 feet deep. So we're pretty much farming on concrete slabs right now. And so that, I mean, this is so broad, like it creates problems with water. And then when you turn up the soil like that, you just expose the underbelly of the skin of the soil to the sun, and then it oxidizes. So that's when you drive by a field that's been tilled, everything's bright red. That bacteria is just blowing off all the nitrogen. It's blowing off everything, all the organic matter that could be used and beneficial for plants. And that's being done all over the world. And so, the soil is compacted.
So basically, we're basically killing the soil, right?
That's correct. Yes.
And it's not a sustainable practice then, right? I mean, eventually something's got to give.
Mm-hmm. And it is. I think the number right now, there's a program, a global program by a famous Indian guru actually named Sadhguru, and he has a website called SafeSoil.com. And that's just real quick and easy to go on and look at. And we're right now like 50% of the arable land is compromised. We're down we're going to be down like 40% on food production over the next 20 years. And that's a slippage too, where like we might be down 5% over the next 10 years and then 15% after that. So this affects global food population or global food availability, and in turn affects sort of like the poorest of the poor from the bottom up.
Right. Yes. You're painting not a pretty picture.
Well,
What's
it's
going.
fortunately, with these practices like that the soil food web's developing, and there's a lot of other names in the industry that are using compost and biology to amend, and people are using rotationally grazed animals to amend the land. This is definitely reversible. It just depends on how bad is it going to get before we fix it fast enough.
Right.
Right.
Mhm.
And so I'd imagine basically what we're doing is we're creating a completely sterile environment that can't grow food. It makes me think of, like, treating the overuse of antibiotics with
Mhm.
humans, and
Well,
what that creates.
yeah, to what you just said, it's not sterility. Actually, it's totally bacterially dominated. And
Okay.
so, right, there's a balance between the bacteria and fungi in the soil, and that's essential to anything that you're growing. The reason why forests are the most productive ecological systems on Earth is because they have a extreme fungal dominance over bacterial dominance. And then there's different successional ranges of plants that love that certain ratios of fungi to bacteria. So the reason why you see huge weed problems in an agricultural field that's being tilled all the time is because that tillage breaks up those mycelial networks. They die, they can never get integrated and connect, and they're constantly turned up and over, and they take a long time to mature. So the bacteria just dominate. Weeds love bacterial dominated soil. So every time you go out and till, you're just like, bring on the weeds. And the same reason why, if you go, let's say there's a housing development that never got quite finished, and you'll actually watch as the middle of that landscape is dirt, and then along the edges you see, oh, there's like weeds and grass over there, and then in the middle it's like, oh, there's some bushes and taller trees, and then on the edge is like that forest that hasn't been touched yet or never was. And so that's a perfect example of successional range. And as you go from dirt with nothing growing in it, where it's 100% bacteria, that, like you said, is leaning sterile, so in very low numbers, very low biomass of bacteria,
Yeah.
to weeds, you get a lot more bacteria, and then to trees, which fungal dominance over bacterial.
Right. So I guess that's the difference between soil and dirt, right? Soil being healthy, dirt being the.
So the green revolution definition of dirt is pretty much limited to the material elements of the dirt matrix that you're observing. They're only going to look at sand, silt, and clay. And if you hear sand, silt, and clay, they're really just referring to the particle size of the material that you're handling. So if you've been on the beach, you can clearly see sand grains. But if you've gotten like clayey hands, like dirty hands, you can't really pick that clay and grains off of your hand. It's kind of stuck. Your hands are just red. And so those are extremely small, those clay platelets. And then silt's kind of in between those two. And so the industrial definition would be, if we have the right blend of these different sizes of crystalline structures, sand, silt, and clay, then plants are going to be able to grow. And I forget the name of it's kind of the father of soil science that coined this other definition, which is the sustainable one definition, but he doesn't limit the definition of soil now to just the material or the mineral elements. He actually includes, does it have organic matter? Organic matter being anything that was alive. So when trees lose their leaves in fall, that's a whole blanket of organic matter down under the ground. And then, is there anything living in it? Because you could sterilize organic matter if you wanted to. Like if I'm growing oyster mushrooms, I use my pressure cooker to pasteurize organic matter. So it creates an environment to where the mycelial network can dominate that matrix that I'm feeding it. So, the true definition of soil is distinct from dirt would be, does it have organic matter? And then does it have living biology actively working in that system?
And that's what we need. And when you have all of that, that's what we would call the soil food web then, right? When you have all those components together.
And there's specifically within the discipline of the soil food web school, there's a handful of microorganisms that we're looking for: nematodes, protozoa, fungi, bacteria, oomycetes, which are bad guys. That's sort of like mold to a mushroom, kind of. There's secondary decomposers that actually eat fungi. You don't want a lot of those in your system. So when I look under a microscope at soil to find what biology's there, I'm looking for a specific set of organisms that, like you said, are making up the soil food web, and their predator-prey relationships are what's releasing the plant available nutrients, whether it's through, their poop, or whether it's through them dying and their carcasses lying around. Things like that are actually what's feeding the plants through the soil, and not necessarily a root to rock relationship where van der Waals forces are passing back ions, like
Right.
some traditional soil science methodologies would entail.
Yes, it goes way beyond just looking at what the soil particle sizes are, or the ions being passed. I mean, you have to look at the organisms and all of that to really have healthy soil. Well, it's funny to me because I notice, like, starting now, all my neighbors are raking up their leaves. Are you implying that we should, is leaf litter good for soil? I mean, it
I
sounds like it is.
You should take your neighbor's leaf litter, because
Okay.
I'm serious. I'm
Yeah.
serious. What's happening right now, I guess from my perspective, is that everyone is actively throwing away the only crop that they've made this year onto the street. So
Yeah.
your yard is I mean, we talked a little bit at your home about what kind of yard's productive for, maybe food consumption versus your standard American lawn. But
Yeah.
like, if like a lot of your trees, like technically an acorn is a fruit, I
Yep.
suppose.
Yeah.
So a lot of your trees in your yard, like your haul that you're getting this year from your, agricultural landscape that you've nerfed because of like your HOA restrictions, is
Yeah.
just your leaves. And you should definitely be taking those back and putting them in your yard. Or, like there's an older part of the woods next to my house that was cleared at some point. And so like, even if, you don't want to put it right in the face on your front lawn, like take your neighbor's leaves and go back in your woods and just throw an extra blanket of your neighbor's leaves on into your woods, just to increase
Yeah.
that level of biomass back there. That'd be a great idea.
Right. Right. I mean, and this is what we should use what kind of nature gives us to create healthy
Mhm.
soil. And then you also talk about lawns. Like, I mean, I hear a lot of like pushback about lawns, but lawns are a type of monoculture, right? That over time, is that necessarily good for the soil to do that? I mean,
I can't imagine it being,
okay.
like I said, if you think about taking the leaves off of your yard every single year, like, some yards have pine straw, and that gets delivered to your lawn every single year, because you can watch it go away. Like, the soil's using that, and you
Yeah.
have to replenish it every single year. But I think about some of the lawns in my neighborhood that only have grass, and the leaves will, drop their leaves, and they'll rake up all the leaves and put them on the street. And I'm like, God, I wonder how long it takes for that tree to die, because you never recycle anything back into the system. So this tree's just sitting there mining, nutrients from the soil, with its available soil biology, sort of like under the concrete landscape of your, 1-inch root deep grass, and it's dropping leaves, dropping leaves, dropping leaves. How long does it take for that tree to die because you never put any leaves back into the soil that you took out?
And we have an idea about that, don't we? I mean, because I notice, from what I've read, a lot of the city trees in various cities that really don't have a lot of space to grow in, but they're like growing under the concrete. They don't last as long as a tree that's living in its natural habitat because it's not getting the nutrients it needs. And then it also brings up another thing for me is like, if you're not feeding the tree, then you're weakening the tree, right? And then you probably have more, the tree's not going to be as healthy, it's not going to be as sturdy over time, it's going to be more
That's right.
susceptible to bugs and so on and so on.
And there's a just recently, I'm not too well read on this, but there's an oak beetle going around right now, I believe. And so some people are freaked out about that, and they're, you know, getting their compost teas ready to spray on their oak trees, to spray sort of like that protective wall of beneficial biology all over their tree, and getting it ready to suppress pests and disease and things like that.
Yeah, so it brings you back to kind of what I do. Like, if you can build up the person's immune system, they're going to be much less likely to be susceptible to any disease. If you can give the plants, the trees, what they are designed to have, good soil and a good healthy environment, they're going to be healthier for it. I mean, it's common sense stuff, but it's like when you look out into the world with our agricultural practices, even at the neighborhood community level, I mean, you know, a lot of people just don't get it, you know, as far as like, you know, the lawns, the spraying of fertilizers and all that stuff, when they can build their own compost.
And not only that, but you have this massive slippage of nutrient density in the things that are growing. So John Kemp, a popular agri-science guy in the sustainable agriculture world, has this thing called like the plant disease triangle or the plant health triangle. You can look it up. It's a great show. But at the top of the triangle is the plant that is has all the biological organisms that it needs, and all of the trace element inputs that it needs to become not only maximally productive, but completely resistant to pests and disease. So, right, there's sort of an emerging field in plant science right now where, you know, you look at sick plants, or you look at plants that are being eaten by bugs and stuff like that, and you think to yourself, okay, is the plant getting eaten by bugs because, you know, the bug's hungry, or is the plant signaling, I'm sick, take me out, please, so then you can cycle me back into the soil, so then healthy plants can grow where I'm standing? And that seems to be more of the case, where we actually have plants in agricultural systems putting out signals to pests going, please eat me so I can be recycled, because where I'm sitting isn't fertile.
Yeah,
wow.
That's
like the definition of illness. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like a kind of built-in innate intelligence, right? With the plant trying to make the soil healthy. So we humans come along not understanding how the networks work. We will tend to, you know, make things worse with our science when we don't look at it in a holistic view. So I see that with a lot of the, you know, the monoculture stuff. Like, eventually, if you're not constantly using, you know, these industrialized fertilizers and stuff, the soil dies within what, like 5 to 10 years? I mean, depending on where you are.
Well, I couldn't give you a timeline exactly, but you're definitely propping up your operation to be completely dependent on these chemicals, pesticides, and fertilizers. And then not only that, I mean, there's so much, like, pun intended, there's so much runoff from your use of those products that aren't literally them washing away by water, but like your soil just becomes dependent on, like, I guess it would be like a human just having like a scaffolding of like, you know, steroid injections sort of like at the end of their life. Like, you know, your corn crops are only standing because of your nitrogen that you're putting out, because you've disturbed the soil so much. And not only that, they're becoming less and less efficient every single time you put fertilizer out. So you have to put more and more fertilizer out. And what we found when COVID came around and the supply chain got messed up is that those fertilizer prices went through the roof. Not only
Right.
did raw materials, but gas, things like that. And so a lot of these farmers were, up a creek, trying to keep up their already failing and subsidized operations, and they had no alternatives. So what the soil food web has been doing is going out and saying, hey, why don't you, we're hippies and we want to spray compost tea and put compost out in your field, and you're not going to think it works. So, but it's not working for you anyway. So why don't you at least break even and pay us just what you pay for fertilizer a year? And they're coming back and saying, not only did you save my crop, but you increase yield, and reduced weeds, reduced pest suppression, things like that.
So part of the solution is the compost then, right? I mean,
Oh, for sure. That's what holds the biology. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So can you speak to that? Like how can we, just like, average citizens, like, contribute to soil health with composting?
Well, you don't even need compost necessarily. I'd say the easiest thing to do is know your fungal foods, and organic matter being one of them. So your browns. So when you talk about composting, we talk about high nitrogen, your greens, which have like a middle amount of nitrogen, and it's sort of like getting your fiber in. Your high nitrogen being your cookies, your greens like your salad, and then your browns, which are just your really long lasting, extremely molecularly complex and interwoven food for your fungi. And so, like the example earlier I gave, go steal your neighbor's leaves they put on their curb, because what you could do is come back and dress all of your trees with it in your yard. Go dress all of under your bushes in your yard. Dry it out and use it as mulch for your house plants. Not only that, but like right now, a lot of this leaf litter down here in the Southeast is fresh. It's right off the top of the soil. So it's going to become a taxi cab for all the microbiological organisms that were sitting there on the soil when the leaves fell, and all of the fungal spores that were sent in the wind and landed on top of them. So the second you put them back on top of another operating biological system, all those organisms are going to get woken up, and you're going to be able to take advantage of them without even having to make compost.
And so those are your browns, right?
Those are your browns. Mm-hmm. And then just a super easy compost recipe would be, I think, 60% browns. So 6 parts brown, 3 part green, 1 part high nitrogen.
So what is the green then? Is green like grass cuttings or something?
Anything green. That's
anything
right.
green.
Anything green. That's got, so there's a carbon to nitrogen ratio that changes in width depending on what you're looking at. So a brown would have no nitrogen and a lot of carbon in it. Like I said, when you turn the soil up and over, and it gets that rust red color, it's oxidized and they've blown off all the nitrogen, and it turns red and brown. Your leaves that are all dried up and have all the nitrogen's oxidized and blown off go from green to brown. And so your lawn clippings, when they're fresh, are considered greens. Any of your food waste at home that you can, seem to get together are considered greens.
Okay.
Your landscaping waste, like your shrubbery cuttings, things like that, your leaves, greens. Browns would be leaves, mulch, greens that have turned brown. So things that you've let sit outside.
I mean, it makes it really simple. Mm-hmm. What about so you said browns, greens, and then you said nitrogen, but it's just the nitrogen is based on a good easy way is based on the color of what you're dealing with, right?
So it depends on the material too. So high nitrogens, it's very Googleable. So like in my compost pile that I made, this fall, One of them I used brewery, like spent brewers grains. So you can go to any brewery in your municipality and say, hey, do you have any spent brew grains that I could just come pick up? And they'll be like, yeah, we already have a farmer coming to pick them up all the time. They're free. You can go get them.
Yeah.
Super high nitrogen. And that's really the cakes and the cookies for the microbiological organisms to get that energy, to get that energy up and going, and to get that temperature up in your compost pile. And then a lot of people use manures. You can use coffee grounds, and a few other things for sure.
Yeah. And this is practice that we should all get into. I mean, what got us to this? I mean, I just know when I was going through my environmental studies in school, I remember listening to a teacher that said, look, this is the world we live in. We cannot feed the world with organic stuff, and going back to that. And it kind of made my stomach turn a little bit, just because I was like, is that really true? You know, if we all kind of got on board with like sustainability practices.
What's interesting is yes and no. So if
Okay.
you take traditional agricultural practices and then impose an organic model on top of it, not only are you killing the soil, but then you're trying to farm organically without any of the jet fuel for plant growth. So
Right.
probably not. But organic isn't in bed with this soil food web approach, this healthy soil centric philosophy all the time. And so if you use compost teas, compost extracts, and the first thing you do when you're going out in your field every morning is maybe taking a soil test, you're constantly monitoring soil biology for the successional range of plants that you want to grow. I think there'd be too much food. We could sustain our current communities in our yards.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Easily.
People, right. And all that unused space with lawns. And I'm on this lawn kick but I guess lawns are not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I don't want, because they are a form of carbon capture, right? I mean, if we were talking about climate change, but I would think maybe this, like planting trees on your lawn, how big it is. I mean, it seems like you have a better source of carbon capture, plus you're creating food, especially if they're food-based trees, whatever they may be. And then that web extends even further, not only to the microbes in the soil, but as soon as you have that, one of the things I love about my yard's very small, you've been there. But one of the things I love about trying to like compost and keep the soil there healthy is now you attract, and I know some people don't like this, but now you attract some wildlife, which I love, because now you have healthy trees, and now you attract wildlife, which is like TV for me, watching, looking out my window. It just seems like once you start doing this, you're more in line with the natural ways of how it should be. So, when we're talking about like bringing back the wildlife, it seems like, well, one of the places to start is at the microbial level.
Well, yeah, the micro level too. So the individual in their own living habitat is probably going to be what moves the needle with this endeavor. I think like global insect population biomasses for flying insects are down over 50%. There's a lot of keystone species not showing up in the numbers that they used to be all over the world. I mean, everyone knows that bees are having a hard time. So, and that's largely, I mean, we'd like to say, oh, it's pesticides, oh, it's climate change, oh, it's a combination of those things. But I think something that's really opened up for me this year when I've just been observing sort of the natural environment that I exist in is I look around and, bugs eat certain things, and it all starts a lot of the times for a lot of these flying species at the flower and the nectar of like a plant flower. And I'll walk around the neighborhood and I'm like, God, there's no flowering plants here. So like, sure, we're killing them with the pesticides and they're suppressed, but also we've taken away all the food. Like there's no food anywhere for these flying insects. And then sort of like on a broader topic about yards, which I know we talked a little bit about. So they actually, when you build a house, they actually take away the layer of topsoil that could have been there on your property, and they
Right.
have to compact your entire property in order to meet legal regulations and have your foundation be able to press up against something solid so your house doesn't fall over.
Right.
So, when we think about yards, these are also the sickest environments that exist, because we took away the entire layer of organic matter that could have been there, disturbed the entire system, compacted the entire system, and then we, like funneled in landscaped trees and was like, okay, have fun growing in concrete. And then we throw pine straw on it, and then you put sod on your yard, and then you water it with water that comes out of the municipal system full of chlorine and chloramine that's constantly killing all of your bacteria every single time you water it. It's
Yeah.
just down, it spins and goes down and down and
Yeah,
down.
it's just it's a negative cycle, right? It's like
Mhm.
we have to get back to looking at these things holistically. I think me and you talked about this before, but I also read this in the in that book Braden Sweetgrass, which is a really good book. But she talked about the concept of the three sisters concept when you're planting plants, and as opposed to monocultures, how we do. And the three sisters, in as far as Native Americans see it, is corn, legumes, beans, and squash. And in that chapter, the way she described it was fascinating to me, because she said, the corn kind of, if you plant those three seeds together, the corn kind of takes off first. And then what happens is the legumes in there help fix nitrogen there and will start growing up, but don't harm the corn. And then the squash, with its leaves lying close to the ground, help trap moisture in the soil, so the soil doesn't get too dry. And it's like these three plants, they call the three sisters, work together to create more food. So they actually, the Native Americans would get much more food with doing that, instead of just planting one row of corn and then one, legumes.
Mhm.
They without knowing the science, they understood
Right.
that this works and creates the soil being healthy. And not only that, there are composting techniques. And it's just like we've come so, I don't know, it's almost like we become so myopic, and on the one hand with our science, and we lose sight of the holistic view of how, if we truly looked at it with a big holistic view, we can see how it all works together. And it ultimately serves us, right? I mean, if that, you can make the case like the health of the soil is going to create unhealthy humans
Mhm.
if,
And the,
if the soil is unhealthy.
yeah, that's where there's a woman by the name of Dee Dee Perchhouse, and she's written a few books, the names of which aren't coming to me at the
Uh-huh.
moment. And has coined another term called the soil sponge. But she's a regenerative or an integrative health doctor, Chinese medicine
Yeah.
herbalist, acupuncturist. And she was sitting in her small farm town in Vermont and realized that floods were causing the roads to wash away, and her population that she was essentially the primary care provider for, due to the small town and its remoteness, was getting sicker and sicker with more updated sort of agricultural technology in the area.
Yeah.
And right now she's really pioneering this relationship between soil health and public health, where if let's say you took a creation stance on evolution, like for sure complex biological systems come out of relationships inside of the soil system. If you took a religious background, it's like, I think God literally pulled like the ribs of Adam out of the dirt, right?
Yeah. 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 No.
And so if and not to mention the there's a lot of mycologists that are that are finding really profound benefits in eating fungi, eating mushrooms, whether cognitive, immune health, things like that. And so we're disturbing all of these fungal communities in our agricultural practices, and our plants no longer have access to what Paul Stamets would call the soil's internet. And so is soil health public health? Definitely, for sure, because the plants can't get the micronutrients they need from the soil without the soil biology, which means that we're all left taking, supplements to get all those micronutrients like magnesium, zinc, like all these earth minerals, things like that. And then are we also missing like some sort of, natural intelligence that has this connectedness to the earth that we can't necessarily quantify, that we're just totally missing out on because we're not eating it anymore. And that could be contributing to how bad things are getting and how we seem to be, running faster and faster away from the solution.
Yeah. I think, I think anybody could take, I think you can taste the difference too, right? Like I've noticed this between like, crops grown with sustainable practices, or even designated as organic, and ones that are more conventional. Like there's a huge taste difference where it's almost like you've taken the life out of that, and it starts with the soil. I mean, this hit home for me. I was Costco recently had like a box of organic mangoes there at Evan, and now recently they're doing conventionally grown mangoes, and the difference in taste is crazy to me. And you see this kind of across the board, and it's unreal to me that we can't, with science, like big industrial complexes, agricultural, where we can't use this stuff to replenish the soil back, instead of using tons and tons of fertilizer and then packing down the soil. And it's like, what's going to get us out of this is what I mean. Like, it's going to crash if at some point, right?
Yeah. The complexity of the biological system in the rhizosphere at the root zone, happening on top of a root, like just one cell structure at a time, is totally insane. Like what the plant's doing is, when it's creating sugars through photosynthesis, is literally sending out messages to the soil biology and sort of waking all that biology up. And, at each site on that root zone, it's going, hey, here's some sugar. I want, like, 100 millionth of a microgram, or I'm exaggerating here for effect, of boron. I want just a hint of cobalt. Like, I just want a little bit of sulfur. Like, I just want a little bit of this, and the fungi is like, oh yeah, here, I'll take that sugar. And the bacteria is like, yeah, I'll mine that for you. And what they're doing is, on command and in relationship, constant closed loop feedback between this entire system, all over the entire surface area of the root zone of this plant, is getting exactly what they need in the exact quantity, perfectly, every second of every single day. And there's no way that humans could replicate. It's just there's too many. You'd need a supercomputer to run that many variables. And then if you combine it with, the surface area, and then not to mention, we talked about like soil compaction. Our plants are supposed to have roots that go deep. And so with this layer of soil compaction that's going on right now, like, that, not only do the plants, they can't go down, so they can't access water when there's a drought, but they have to go out, and then they compete with each other on the 2D playing field. It's like being in traffic. If we had tunnels under the highways, it'd be a lot more efficient if we could go down. And so I forget the original question here now that I'm.
Well, you're just saying that when you compact the soil, you're creating less space, right? For the plants to feed themselves, and also to feed the soil, and the soil to feed the plants.
Mm-hmm.
and then you have this runoff effect when you're doing that also. And I guess my thing is that since climate change is such in the news, right? It seems like, man, taking care of the soil would solve a big problem with a lot of stuff we're dealing with climate change.
Not only a big problem, I think that's going to be the solution. So the most complicated piece of technology we have for carbon sequestration right now is a tree.
Yeah.
Hands down.
Yeah.
And so not only can you plant more trees, which is true, but how deep can you get the carbon that you sequester? And like I just talked about, like the insane surface area of the root zone, every time that plant goes through the cycle, the 24-hour cycle of photosynthesis, it's pulling carbon from the environment, turning it into sugar, then distributing it out within its root zone. And those microorganisms are taking it up into their bodies. The plant's taking the carbon up into its body and growing. That's what just makes more tree, is just more carbon from the air. And then the microorganisms are also distributing that into the soil. And so the deeper our plant's roots can go, the more carbon we can sequester, every 24-hour photosynthesis cycle. And then the with more efficiency in which it is stored. So like that carbon's not going to come out of the system because you haven't disturbed that surface layer to then oxygenate everything, and then the carbon blows off. So like that's another thing that happens when you till, is that any of the sequestered carbon that could have got into the soil from having plants, you just released it all back into the atmosphere. So one of the solutions, and I think the quickest solution for climate change, is going to be restoring soil health from sea to mountain too, which is really important. So there's a thing called,
because we depleted it that much and it's extensive, right? All over the planet.
Yeah. I mean, the effects of climate change aren't only just like carbon-based temperature, maybe, or greenhouse gas affected temperature, but also just changes in weather patterns, whether it's droughts and floods and things like that too. So when the soil's restored, and I'll bring up D.D. Perchhouse again, who kind of coined the phrase the soil sponge. What happens is you get this spongy matrix of soil that has the spaces to hold water and the spaces to hold air. And then it becomes this aerated cushion where it's able to take too much water if too much comes, hold water if there's a drought and there isn't any rain. And then when the system's operating properly from sea to mountain, we have this huge, large scale hydraulic pump that's actually happening, where the snow melt in the mountains is slowly coming down in rivers, lakes, and streams, down into the ocean, as we all kind of are aware of. But another thing that's happening is the rain that does come down, that's not being captured by those rivers, lakes, and streams, that gets into the groundwater, that gets into the water table, is then transpired by trees evaporating up out of the ground and then being moved higher and higher and higher and higher. And what do you think snows in the mountains? And so we've completely disturbed that cycle as well. So
which you would think would have a cooling effect anyway, right? Of course, that by itself.
I mean, you talked about the squash shading the soil from too much heat, is the same thing that's happening with our plants to us, or with our trees to us, is that they're shading us from too much heat. And then when they can shade us, we're retaining water, and then the overall temperature at the forest floor is dramatically different than the temperature in the atmosphere, things like that.
And even more so in an urban environment where you don't have a lot of trees, right?
Yes,
where you're taking trees down, or even in suburban environments where it's houses and very little trees also. But can you, but I know we're getting close to the end of the time, but can you speak to, I think we talked about this also, what are your thoughts on like planting native species as opposed to like foreign species plants around your house and stuff like that. I mean, I know, like, is there any thought into that? I mean, I know one thing that it can do, like looking for what your native flora species are can help bring wildlife. But I would think, like, depending on where you are, if you're planting native species, that may have a beneficial impact on your soil instead of planting, non-native species.
Right. So I suppose a drawback to maybe planting non-native species is that there's a common limited number of landscape plants that are up for selection. And so we're really getting monocultures in our neighborhood, whether it's like all of the trees in the neighborhood are just crepe myrtles. That not only is that visually boring, but what happens if there's a crepe myrtle blight? It's like, 60% of the trees in your neighborhood just died, things like that. Right. And we're setting it up to where an organism would be advantaged if they were to evolve in that direction. So I think that's one of the things to think about, is just maybe not planting what your neighbors have, native or not.
That's a really good point.
Yeah,
that's a really good point, because it even goes into the like when we talk about animal farming, right? Like that's what's going on also with like fast chicken farms, right? Like you can have a disease that can come through there and just wipe all of them out. Not to mention they tend to be genetically identical, which also will, if something comes along, destroy the population. It also makes me think of like what happened, was it in the 1900s with the American chestnut, right?
That's right.
Is almost like
there's a handful of
right?
scientists like monitoring the last ones. Yeah. There's still a few around, but they're like if you go up into Western North Carolina, they're all there's an Asian variety that's that people have planted in replacement, and they're thriving very well, but none of them are traditional American nowadays.
Yeah. So that is interesting. So the more species, native species, like that's the other thing. So you have different native species that in a way protect each other from diseases and pests. And if you're going to just plant in your, just certain things, you're setting yourself up for problems there. It just speaks to the gut health connection, right? If you have a good mix of gut flora, you tend to be healthier, instead of one species, after taking antibiotics or whatever, wiping out a lot of others, and one species can overgrow, whether it's beneficial or not at the time. If it's out of balance, it's not going to be beneficial to you anymore.
That's right. And then another thing too, there's, a good foundational permaculture principle is just use what you have. And so a lot of non-native species that are invasive that we're stuck with are useful. So I think it is important for you to know what's in your yard. If you already have it, how is it useful? If you have space, definitely plant native plant species, one to support maybe localities and nurseries that grow those late native plant species, know what they are, they're cultivating them. That's fantastic. Or if you have a green thumb, you can just pull the seeds offline or pull the saplings offline yourself and try to grow them. And then that just creates diversity, like we just talked about, and then different ecological niches, like all the way up the food chain.
Yeah, it's interesting because going back to that book I was talking about, Braden Sweetgrass, she was talking about a non-native species that grows everywhere. Everybody would know it if they looked at it, but it's basically it's from Europe and it's plantain, and most people call it a weed. But she and I think Native Americans used to turn their nose up at it because it's like what the Europeans brought over. But anyway, this non-native species, which grows everywhere now, gives back. It's not. It doesn't just take, and not to mention it's also a great food source and also a good medicine if you know what you're doing with it. So anyway, is there anything else we should hit? That was great.
I got a lot of questions, man. I'll give them to you kind of rapid fire since we're out of time.
Yeah, please.
Can someone, I live in Florida, so you can imagine these well manicured lawns, every house looks the same, all that kind of stuff. Can someone have a well manicured, that green, white picket fence type lawn and practice the sustainability? And if so, how? You know, it sounds like native species and then being diverse within the neighborhood and things like that. But what are some ways, if they can, you know, have that well manicured lawn and maintain being sustainable with it?
Definitely eliminate your use of pesticides, fertilizers, things like that. See if you can start generating your own compost or purchasing compost everywhere. I didn't mention another form of compost called vermiculture compost. In Florida, vermiculture is very popular. It's just composting with worms. And what you can do is, instead of, you know, having the, like in Winston-Salem, well, I don't want to give the corporation a shout out, but there's a very popular fertilizer company that comes by, and they just wear backpacks and they spray your whole entire lawn with inorganic salt, right? And so it'd be like you drinking a bunch of salt water from the ocean and going, I'm gonna have a great day. And so it's quit using those and see if you can tap into whether making it yourself or purchasing from the locality. Compost teas, compost extracts, and start spraying those in your lawns. So what's going to go on under your well manicured lawn is it's going to start building, you know, biological communities, biological networks. It's going to create that soil sponge. And then, you know, Florida, you guys get a lot of rain. You can get hit pretty hard with a hurricane or two. And so when you do have those huge rainfall events, what's going to happen is your lawn's going to be the only one that's not flooded, because that biology has gone down, deep, and created a huge sponge to soak up all that excess water.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. It's a real problem in the suburban areas, more so than areas that are a little further, more rural off and near the farmlands and things like that. That's a really good point that I've noticed, but didn't know necessarily that was the reasoning why. Now, is there a way, let's say, you know, your neighbor is spraying, and it's funny you guys mentioned, like, or you point out like the chlorine, all the stuff coming out of the sprinkler,
right?
Man, in Florida, I've walked on the sidewalk and the sprinklers for like the city are running, and I get some of that water on me, my skin breaks out, it feels itchy and uncomfortable. It's nuts that's like how we're feeding the soil around us, and then thus the food that we're going to eventually eat. But is there a way someone, if their neighbor is not practicing this sustainability, is there a plant, a way that they can kind of help buffer at least what they have, and because I know there's going to be a lot of runoff. Is there something that you can do in terms of kind of buffering your own soil and hope that it obviously spreads out and helps everywhere else, but buffering and ensuring you maintain a nice, sustainable, healthy soil in your yard, despite your neighbor?
Right. You know, before I forget too, the way that you can get rid of and tie up all that chlorine and chloramine that's coming out of your municipal, like if you need a pot full of water to water your plants and you're like, oh my God, I'm killing my plants with tap water. What you can do is take a little bit of compost, a little bit of dirt, a little bit of organic matter, just passively run water through there. The water will turn hopefully a brown tint if you're running through it. If you're running through some nice compost, it'll turn completely brown, and that's called humic acid or fulvic acid. And those are the enzymes that fungi use to mine and bind and create food for themselves. And that's what gives it that color, is that big complex organic molecule just deflects light. And so it becomes opaque. And so what happens is those guys will grab onto the chloramine, the chloramine, and the chlorine. Some people don't know what chloramine is. It's just a longer lasting, more hardcore version of chlorine, because our pipes are so dirty and our bacteria is so resistant that chlorine just doesn't work anymore. We need chloramine.
We're so awesome.
Right. I know. And so with that example, like, you know, you're binding up all of these toxins with the biology and with the compost. I think that itself creates the perimeter at the edge of the yard. So like, you know, first thing that comes to my mind is just trees. Because they're the closest thing to what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, the trees are the closest thing to immortality that we have, and so that would probably be the sturdiest and the hardiest border as far as a plant. But if that biology's down there, there's nothing that a fungal community cannot. There's no pathogen, or maybe not pathogen is the right word. There's no toxin that the proper fungal community cannot become resistant to, build a wall to, and then clean up and then integrate in itself and then reintegrate into the environment. That's their job. So definitely biology is the answer there too.
Yeah.
Well, that's good news,
Mm-hmm.
right? That there's like, you can put toxins in whatever soil, and if the soil's right, it will clean it up.
Yeah. Paul Stamets did one of his more famous, I guess, examples of that was they just put a bunch of crude oil on like a pile of, organic matter, and they, left one for control, one they just tried to grow plants in, and then one they put oyster fungus in. And so the oyster, of course, the ones they inoculated with oyster mushrooms just totally exploded. And at the end of the experiment, it was just this lush flower garden that the birds had brought in because the fungi came out, and that started the life cycle. So
yeah, that's
yeah.
neat.
So we really need to cultivate that fungi, it seems like, too.
Oh, definitely, for sure.
Extremely important. And then I did want to, you mentioned soil death. Is that if I reinstill this fungi and cultivate this fungi, is that how I can overcome that?
Yeah. What's interesting is the benefits of the biological relationships, or excuse me, the biological relationships are what create the spaces, and the spaces are what create the benefits. And so it's a constant, back and forth. And I'm sorry, I forgot your question.
Yeah.
One more time.
No. As far as soil death, cultivating the fungi to overcome that, how,
Right.
Is that a permanent thing? And then if not, how can I overcome that?
Yeah, using compost teas, compost extracts, taking your neighbor's yard waste just to build an organic layer, so the biology that's available has food to now eat. You can overcome compaction 100% of the time if you stop using your inorganic inputs. So like a lot of the case studies within the soil food web, their team will go out and they'll completely fix a farm. They'll have great results. They'll be on the up and up, and all of a sudden they'll look under the microscope and all the biology's gone. Well, there will be, someone internally that didn't like them, or someone that didn't get the memo, and they'll have gone out and sprayed the entire system. So I'm happy you mentioned, how do I become friends with my neighbor so that I can convince them not to use fertilizers on their yard anymore, to quit polluting mine is a great question. But yeah, getting that biology back in there, just by passively feeding it organic matter, or taking a direct approach and trying to get compost, trying to get biology back in there, that's definitely going to bring the soil back 100% of the time. I mean, the dirt is there. It is there. It's just the biology that you got to get back in, and they'll create the spaces. The spaces will bring all the downstream effects.
Gotcha. Now, is soil death like a specific thing? Does it, if you measure a soil and it passes some sort of level, does that mean it's soil death, or is it more of a general term?
I don't know if soil death is, those two words together is a thing. The soil is dying, and there are ways through my certification discipline to determine if your soil has the microbiological communities in the biomass numbers that would allow you to grow plants successfully in certain successional ranges. And so yeah.
So with your I want to say practice, because we're so used to calling it practice, but with your business and your practice of applying this knowledge, you'll go in, you're going to assess somebody's yard for the general health of the soil, and then provide healthy soil tips in regards to what you found and how to fix it. Almost kind of like as a physical therapist, providing a rehab plan. Here's the impairments we see. Here's the lack of strength, range of motion, what we're missing, and what we can kind of build back these ways.
So that's correct. So right now I have my microscopy certification. So I can, it's kind of funny, you mentioned physical therapy. Like I can look at you and be like, this is the number of push-ups that you can do. but technically I'm not a soil food web consultant yet. So I can't tell you this is how you get to more push-ups. But I think there's a lot of, so that's just my restriction within the certification.
Sure.
But those principles are pretty broad and obvious.
Right.
So like adding in fungal foods, adding in compost teas. And then once I'm certified in my soil food web consultantship, that milestone is when I can create quote unquote biocomplete soil amendments. And so those compost teas and extracts have the biomass numbers in the right ratios of fungi, bacteria, protozoa, beneficial nematodes, and don't have any of the bad guys. They don't have many ciliates. They don't have any oomycetes. And so the soil that I could make, or the compost that I would make using my closed feedback loop with the active biology monitoring in the microscope, they're finding that you only need 30, 40, 50% of what you would normally buy as compost from just your normal retailer, because the density of the biology in the soil that the soil food web is offering is so high, that you just need a lot less of it.
Right. And you know that based off whatever test and
Right. I
what
know
you're
that
doing.
based off of my assessment. And those
Okay.
those are really quick. You can do them in the field. People actually bring their microscope out to agricultural properties. It takes 30 minutes to an hour, depending on kind of what data you want to quantify. And it gives you, right then and there, exactly what's going on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's
awesome.
cool.
That's awesome. My last question, I'd just be remiss if, I imagine you don't just fall into this, man. How'd you find your path here?
So, yeah, I got really interested in personal fitness, and then that led me to, well, I got to eat the right food. And then that led me to where does the food that I'm eating come from? And then what's the best kinds? And then it's like, oh, well, the best thing that I can eat is something that I grew myself. And then at the time I was experimenting with just mycology, like hunting for mushrooms, foraging. I'm an Eagle Scout outdoorsman. So that's always been a part of who I am. And so then it was like, oh, how do I grow food myself? I'm like, I'd like to garden. And then, I'm a meat eater, I'm an omnivore. So it's like, well, what's the most responsible way to eat meat? And then it was like, oh my God, what's this whole entire industry of sustainable rotational pasture raised animal farming? Really interested in that. Just on my own time, visited a handful of farms just to see it, and experience it. And then honestly, it's just like the YouTube algorithm just led
Yeah.
me
Start
to
feeding you.
one of Dr. Elaine Ingham's lectures that someone had posted. And I was like, this is it. Like, this is
Yeah.
the most important thing I've ever heard in my whole entire life. Puts everything together, makes total sense. How do I get involved? And it was, I just looked up her name, and she has a school, and I was like, okay, I'm in.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
That's all I need. So
That's awesome. Yeah, it's really interesting just thinking about seeing those farms that you mentioned, checking out the sustainability farms. It's like I went to the Central Valley of California maybe 2 or 3 years ago. A lot of farming there, right? That's like where they produce most of their food in California. Absolutely. No offense, everyone in the Central Valley. Absolutely desolate, terrible dirt, just nothing going on. And then, yeah, they're spraying the chemicals everywhere. And it just, as you and Keoni were chatting, it just really brought to mind, like talking about that soil, talking about the packed layers. And it's just desolate. There's not even, the wind is whipping 40, 50, 60 miles an hour, but it's not kicking up any dirt, any dust, nothing, because it's so compact down, so droughted down. And then you can tell it's just been tilled and grown. We've grown avocados here for 20 years, and that's part of the problem. Versus you go somewhere like Keoni's yard, and there's just such an abundance of variety of plants, of actual wildlife. And and Keoni is not a farmer, and
No.
those places I'm talking about are where all the avocados are coming from, and it's just nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you have to really kind of, when you get down to the basics, it's like what's really taking care of all of us. It's like the plants, the microbes. That's what is health for us. And we have to have for us as humans to be healthy. I mean, it really starts at, okay, well, how can we make the earth healthy? And that starts with the soil.
Yep.
And we're just depleting the heck out of it. And then that kind of solidified for me, Pasquale, when we talked, and yeah, so it's pretty neat. It's kind of like you just get hit upside the face and your whole worldview changes, right? When you see that connection, and you just start treating, like, even I have a little space, you just start treating your soil and around you just a little bit better. You can see how everything interacts, and you just become more connected. I think you realize the connection, and you have a more respect for that connection as you see it.
Yeah, I think there's a great quote, and it's most men don't see God because they don't look low enough.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm looking as low
cool
as I possibly can with
Yeah,
this.
yeah. And that's the foundation, right? Like, yeah, that's foundation. The soil's the foundation where we should go. Yeah, and it is the key. That's the other thing. Like, I don't hear, like, and you brought it up, it does seem like if not the key, the major key to our climate crisis that we're dealing with. Like, let's heal the soil. But am I correct in saying, just for our listeners, like, a real simple thing you can do to help your soil is just leave the leaves alone?
Yeah. There's a gardening technique called negligence.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Hey, I can do that. I can do that.
Nature takes care of itself. We're the ones that think that we can do that for it. It was here. We came out of it. So it was here before us, going to be here after us.
Well,
like the best thing you can do a lot of the times is just leave it alone.
Leave it alone. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's good advice. Well, thank you so much. I know we went way over time, but I'm glad we did. I'm glad we didn't get cut off.
Pascal, how do they find you?
You can find me at salemsoilsolutions.com, and my contact information's on there. I don't have any social media. I have a LinkedIn, but it's my it's for my packaging career. So you can add me on there if you want. We can chat. Always open to conversation, things like that. And then this is an emerging business too for me. So if you're a Winston local or a local farmer in North Carolina, and you're interested in my services, I'd love to talk to you about it. I'd love to, practice my profession for free as I get my feet on the ground here. So definitely reach out. I just love to meet more people in the space. And if you don't mind, I have a poem that I'd like to share with you guys.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It's called Soil's Web. So I was just, another great gardening or I guess agricultural technique or permaculture technique is just observation. So here it is: Soil's Web. Humic acids, fungal exudes, cocci, bacilli, bacterial glues, clay colloids to aggregates, mining rocks, dissolved cements, equalized by nematodes, arthropods with outside bones, quickly moving forms with tails, flagellates, amoeba snail, rotifers and water bears, ciliates with body hairs, a design so grand it built the world, those aggregates, they led to squirrels. So when you see a spider webs between the limbs of subtle hedge, take a look, although entombed, insects wait to be consumed, one might bow to that small arachnid, eight-legged and unattractive. Her mighty web came from herself, weaving branches, leaves, a stone itself, a daring feat spun in the air, victims winged and unaware. Just like the soil, she's realized her architecture is the prize. Binding air, the soil sings as she returns the flying things.
Wow. That's incredible, man. I love that.
Thank you.
That's incredible. All right, we have to get my mom to put that in calligraphy. That's awesome.
Oh, great. Awesome.
Awesome.
I'd love to share it. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to do that. I'd love that hanging in my clinic, actually. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can see, I mean, I was just like sitting there, like I was saying, the soil sponge, it's the spaces that traps all of the energy for this whole entire system to work. And so, the spider gets it, like she makes the spaces all the time. Like the spaces between the limbs that she makes the web on are also spaces. And so, yeah.
Dude, I love
Yeah.
that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
That's really cool. What a great way to end the podcast. Well, we definitely got to get you back on here because I think we can really delve deep into how people should compost, right? And what to look
for
for.
sure.
So I
Yeah.
want to talk about, I definitely want to talk about that with you at some point. And then I also want to talk about, kind of the animal component to it, right? Like how farmers can use their animal. I have a cattle
Right.
farmer that I see in my clinic occasionally, and I think this information would really, really help him. And it was interesting because one of the things he has to do, I know we can just go on forever, so I should end.
Right,
but one of the things he has to do is he has to supplement his cattle with magnesium all the time. Like they have to supplement. I didn't realize you had to do that. And I wonder if that has to do with like what they're being fed. Like I wonder what the normal diet is and all that. But anyway, topic for another day.
I could answer that question, but you're right. Topic for another day.
All right. So let's answer that question. Definitely. At another point. But anyway, thank you. And man, I love having you on. And I want to copy that poem. Let's do it.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I've enjoyed this a lot. Thank you guys for the opportunity. This was great. It's been a pleasure.
Great.